Prime Minister Julia Gillard, Chairman of the Lowy Institute, Frank Lowy, AC, former Prime Minister Bob Hawke, AC, and Blanche Dalpouget, Deputy Prime Minister and Treasurer Wayne Swan, Foreign Minister Senator Bob Carr, Trade Minister Craig Emerson, Minister for School Education Peter Garrett AM, Head of the White Paper Task Force and former Secretary of the Treasury Dr Ken Henry AC, Secretary of PM&C Ian Watt AO and Acting Secretary of DFAT Gillian Bird, Lowy Institute Board Directors Michael Thorley AO and Mark Ryan, former Lowy Institute Board Director Professor Ross Garno AO, Chairman of the ABC Jim Spiegelman AC, corporate members, distinguished guests, friends of the Lowy Institute, ladies and gentlemen. I feel I must have mentioned almost everybody in the audience. Welcome all, and can I begin by asking you please to turn off your phones. Ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to welcome you all here for the launch of the Australian Government's White Paper on Australia in the Asian Century. And can I thank you, Prime Minister, very sincerely for accepting our invitation to launch this important document here at the Lowy Institute. PM, everyone is excited. When the taxi pulled up outside my house this morning to bring me into work, my 4-year-old rushed in and told me that Julia Gillard was here to give me a lift. It was a white car. Ladies and gentlemen, in September last year, Prime Minister Gillard commissioned this white paper in order to consider the economic and strategic changes in the region and to position Australia to capture the benefits generated by the Asian century. As Australia's leading think tank, we at the Lowy Institute certainly feel the ripples of the Asian century. We know that it's upon us. Every report we issue, every event we host, is touched in some way by Australia's interactions with Asia, the region in which so many of our country's future opportunities and challenges lie. All of our research, whether it's on maritime security or the US presidential elections or the economic links between China and the Gulf or the G20, all of it is marked by Asia's rise. The polarity has shifted, Prime Minister, and the world senses it, and we certainly know it here at Bligh Street. There has been much talk, PM, of the United States pivoting to Asia. But Australia didn't need to pivot to Asia. We were already facing it head on. All your recent predecessors, if I may say, I think have understood Asia's importance. I think of Bob Hawke's role in establishing APEC with Dick Woolcott, who's here, and in commissioning the Garno report. Paul Keating quickened the pace of Australia's interactions with Asia and stood up the APEC leaders meeting. John Howard rejected the idea of a clash between history and geography and deepened ties with both the United States and China. I think of Kevin Rudd's work in bringing about an Asia-Pacific community and your own achievements in adding ballast to the India relationship and now issuing this white paper. But still, there is much, much more work to do. It seems to me the challenge that this white paper poses to all of us, to government, to business, universities, think tanks, schools, and indeed individuals, is to thicken our connections to Asia, to engage the region wholeheartedly. There is a big opportunity here, but to seize it, we'll need energy and focus and imagination. Prime Minister, if I may say so, the timing of this launch is superb, coming only 1 week after Australia was elected to the UN Security Council, after a quarter-century's absence. And may I congratulate you and Kevin Rudd and Bob Carr for initiating and prosecuting our campaign with such vigour and effectiveness. Serving on the Security Council will require us to address seriously all the biggest global issues in the next 2 years, but it will also make the Council more representative of the Asia-Pacific, a point that you have made. It will bring us into much more intimate engagement with major regional powers that will be sitting on the Council, including the United States, China, Russia and South Korea. It will increase our leverage on every foreign policy front, including in Asia. And of course, the Security Council is the second global forum we've joined in recent years. We're also a part of the G20, which is now the premier global forum for international economic collaboration. And we at the Institute are delighted to be working with the Treasurer and the Treasury in our new G20 Studies Centre. PM, in my opinion, membership of the Security Council and the G20 doesn't distract us from Asia, it helps us in Asia. It means that we enter the Asian century with confidence and from a position of strength. Ladies and gentlemen, Julia Gillard is the 27th Prime Minister of Australia. She was born in Wales, the daughter of a nurse and an aged care worker. Her family migrated to Australia in 1966 and settled in Adelaide. Ms Gillard was a lawyer and a political advisor before she was elected to the House of Representatives in 1998. She served as a shadow minister, a senior cabinet minister and deputy prime minister before being sworn in as Prime Minister in 2010. PM, again, we are delighted and honoured that you've elected to launch this important document here at the Lowy Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Prime Minister Julia Gillard.
Thank you very much. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and in a spirit of reconciliation pay my respects to elders past and present. Can I thank Michael for that introduction and for the work that he does here at the Lowy Institute. And can I thank our host too, Frank, whose vision for this institute is a model of Australian openness to the world. Thank you very much, Frank. I acknowledge my great predecessor, Bob Hawke, who did so much in office to open our nation up to Asia and to the world. I acknowledge the Deputy Prime Minister and Treasurer, Wayne Swan, my Ministers for Foreign Affairs, Trade and Education, Senator Bob Carr, Dr Craig Emerson and Peter Garrett. And let me particularly acknowledge too and thank Dr Ken Henry, one of the best public servants in our country's modern history. Thank you, Ken. Australians all. History asks great nations great questions. Australia is no exception. Through generations, our great nation has been asked great questions and we have answered them. Could we feed a people on this driest of lands? Could we unite a nation on a continent without the pressures of revolution or war? Could we carry our weight in the world and fight for the freedom of our friends? Could we defend ourselves in our greatest hour of need? Could we rebuild after decades of depression and war? Could we embrace change and find new sources of wealth in demanding new times? Could we say sorry? You see the answer in the nation around you. We got it done. This is a hard place, and we're not angels or saints. The big things are never easy, and we don't get everything right. But we stand today a proud people in a free land. 51st in global population, 12th in global wealth. One of the most equal economies and mobile societies in the world. Respected by our oldest friends in the world, welcomed by our newest friends in the region. But history is calling us again today. Today, history asks us another great question. Can Australia be a winner in the Asian century of change and growth? Today, I launch the plan which answers this question. Today, I launch the government's white paper on Australia in the Asian century. Friends, to plan your future, you have to clearly understand who you are today. Put another way, to build on our strengths, we must know our strengths. 30 years ago, there was still a crisis of complacency in Australian public life, still a culture of cruise and snooze, still a belief that the world owed us a living. But today we don't need a crisis to shake us out of complacency. Quite the contrary. Despite the strengths our people have built and the confidence they have earned, too often our public debate is marked by an economic cringe. I am too proud of our nation to let this stand unanswered or to have it wrongly shape our thinking. We are the nation that deregulated the banks, floated the dollar, introduced enterprise bargaining. We are the nation that had the courage to take what was rigid and brittle and make it agile and strong. We are the nation that stared down the global financial crisis. We are the nation which has produced 21 years of economic expansion, a generation of economic sunshine. We are the nation with low inflation, unemployment and interest rates, with strong public finances, AAA rated. We are the nation that is now poised to seize a clean energy future, to capture the benefits that flow from ubiquitous broadband, to share the benefits of high profitability in mining, to create a higher skilled workforce. I am determined that we will be a nation self-confident enough to feel our strengths and wise enough to know we must build on them. We must embrace change, and we will embrace change, not because we face immediate crisis, not because we stand on a burning platform, but because we face unprecedented opportunity, because we burn with ambition for our nation's future. That's why I've chosen this moment to lay out a plan for our nation's future, which weaves together the policy approach we have been pursuing in government with new policy directions to create the next chapter in our nation's story. Friends, planning for our future not only requires us to understand our strengths, it requires us to understand the scale and the nature of the opportunity before us. While Australia was changing, Asia was changing too. Whatever else this century brings, it will bring Asia's return to global leadership, Asia's rise. This is not only unstoppable, it is gathering pace. The weight of the world's economy is genuinely moving in our direction. When we map the centre of gravity of global consumption, we see it is shifting east by more than 100 miles a year as demand grows on our side of the world. By 2025, it will have reached as far as central India. The world economy is coming our way. We are living through an economic and social transformation on a scale and at a speed which defies comparison. A new Indonesia, Islamic and democratic. A new China, urban and soon ageing. A new India, reforming and young. Above all, a new urban middle class. Asia will become home to most of the world's middle class by as early as 2025, not only becoming the world's largest producer of goods and services, becoming the largest consumer of them. This is good news for Australia, and it should drive a profound change in our thinking about our economic relationship with Asia. Deep in our Australian culture are the assumptions that equate low wages with Asian labour. Not just in populist politics or at the front bar, these assumptions are never far behind debates about workplace flexibility and international competitiveness either. In the Asian century, that changes. The opportunity which a middle-class urban Asia creates won't fall into our laps. The world will still be a competitive one where we must make our own living and make our own way. But with the right plan, we can make the new middle-class Asia a new market for high-wage, high-skill Australia. Think of it this way. Back in the 1980s, Foster's Beer tried to get into China. Today it is Grange carrying the flag. For the first time in our history, Asia is not a threat to our high-skill, high-wage road. It is a reason to stay on it. Our national challenge is to do the things which will ensure that it is Australian products and services, Australian workers, who get the benefit of this new Asian demand. Success in this century will be hard-fought and hard-won. We must have a clear plan to shape the future. This is the white paper on Australia in the Asian century I launched today. National objectives for 2025, the pathways to get there across the 5 areas where we need to act. First, economic strength through building a productive and resilient economy. We will maintain the stable macroeconomic framework created after 1983, a floating currency, independent monetary policy and strong fiscal rules. This is the essential platform for the next stage of our economic strategy. Our national effort will extend our comparative advantage in sectors where Australia already performs well and new markets are emerging. We will still benefit from Asia's appetite for raw materials and energy, but beyond that, we must build a greater resilience in the Australian economy, strengthening sectors like agriculture, tourism, financial services, health and education, transport and logistics, manufacturing, helping Australian firms win work and create jobs here in Australia, helping them open up new opportunities to export and win business in the region. Shaping these efforts will be our relentless focus on Labor's 5 pillars of productivity: education and skills, innovation, infrastructure, tax reform and deregulation. Tax reform to create the right incentives to invest in new capital and research. Long-term planning and partnership for future infrastructure needs, including those parts of Australia where Asia's rise is driving greatest change, like Darwin. Greater collaboration between universities and firms, helped by government, to turn specialist knowledge into commercial advantage. Shared commitment to developing an Asia-capable workforce. Our plan is to grow business innovation, new partnerships, new methods, new practices, new ideas. Our 2025 goal is to be in the world's top 5 for ease of doing business and the world's top 10 innovation systems. Second, strong minds, an education and skills plan to build capabilities. More than ever before, it's impossible to maintain a strong economy without a world-class education system. I am determined that our nation will set high expectations for every student and deliver the support they need to meet them. Unlike in ages past, we will not settle for a student sitting at the back of a class not learning and then drifting away from school early. We will no longer tell ourselves that this is all okay because a manual job will materialise for that child who cannot read, write or count. Our national passion must be to ensure all students are achieving, not just some, with the nation benefiting from the skills and knowledge of all Australians, and with all Australians getting the opportunity for a life of dignified, secure work. Above all, success for an open Australia in a middle-class Asia starts in the classrooms, training centres and lecture theatres of our nation, where we open minds, not just markets, to our region. Our plan is to drive excellence, grow equity, get the most out of everyone. Our 2025 goal is that our school system is in the top 5 in the world and 10 of our universities are in the world's top 100. That every Australian student has continuous access to high-quality education through our National Plan for School Improvement, and that education includes access to Asian language training. Third, expanding and integrating regional markets and building the presence of Australian firms in those markets. For the whole economy to be as strong as mining and agriculture, the whole economy must be as engaged in the region as mining and agriculture. Yes, we are actively working to lower trade barriers, particularly at APEC and through comprehensive free trade agreements. We want capital and ideas to flow more easily across borders for investment, innovation and jobs growth. New integration of regional markets is needed, but we must aim higher and create new regional business relationships, new models and partnerships. This means business pushing into the new spaces and operating across the borders we are lowering. Broader and deeper supply chains across the region, enabling small businesses as well as multinationals to take advantage of growing markets. Our plan is for a new kind, not just a new level, of private sector engagement. Our 2025 goal is that Australia's trade links with Asia will be at least 1/3 of GDP, up from 1/4 in 2011. Fourth, deep and broad relationships with the region at all levels. We should devote a truly national effort to building more comprehensive relationships with our key partners across the region, including through our diplomatic networks. Australian social and cultural life will gain greatly from enhanced people-to-people links. Leisure and sport, work and holidays, learning and culture are all being refined and redefined in contact with neighbours we will know better through this century. Our diaspora in the region are not just an asset to our economy, they are the faces of cultural diplomacy. And through these kinds of personal connections, our public conversation will become more Asia-centred. Think about the media time given over to reporting the challenges of fiscal policy in Portugal or Greece, or even to the US presidential elections. Should less time really be devoted, as it is now, to reporting the economic trends of Indonesia, the debates around freer trade in Japan, the political transition in China? Our plan is for a myriad of stronger, deeper, broader cultural links with the nations of Asia at every level of society. Our 2025 goal is to drive broader change by ensuring 1/3 of board members of Australia's top 200 publicly listed companies and 1/3 of the senior leadership of the Australian Public Service will have deep experience in and knowledge of Asia. History tells us as economic weight shifts, so does strategic weight. This new Asia that we live in dissolves simple strategic triangles. We seek our security in a region of dozens of strategic intersections. So fifth, sustaining the security of our diverse region. Our past engagement is a strength in this crowded and complex environment. Regional militaries are modernising. Economic growth will put more pressure on energy, water and food resources. At the same time, all countries in the region, particularly the major powers, have a deep interest in strategic stability. So we need not be pessimistic, but just as we work to shape the economic future of our region, so too we work to shape our security environment. We are supporting the stabilising presence of the United States, a strong defence force, building habits of trust and cooperation in our region, and a rules-based regional order. We have an ally in Washington, respect in Beijing and more, an open door in Jakarta and Delhi, Tokyo and Seoul. We are engaged institutionally through the Developing East Asia Summit and at the United Nations, now through Australia's membership of the Security Council. Our plan is to stand strongly in our changing region as a mature and confident power. Our 2025 goal is for Asia to be a region of sustainable security in which habits of cooperation are the norm. These are our 5 long-term national directions, and with these long-term directions as our guide, I announce today the first policy steps. All schools will engage with at least one school in Asia to support the teaching of a priority Asian language, taking advantage of the national broadband network. We will fully implement the Australian curriculum, which includes the cross-curriculum priority of Asia and Australia's engagement in Asia. All students will have access to at least one priority Asian language: Mandarin, Hindi, Indonesian and Japanese. These strategies will be part of our national plan for school improvement. We will provide 12,000 Australia Awards to Asian nations over the next 5 years to promote people-to-people links between Australia and the region. We will support business missions through an Asian Century Business Engagement Plan, which will be led by the Trade Minister, Dr. Emerson. We will appoint a Jakarta-based ambassador to ASEAN to support engagement with the ASEAN Secretariat, ASEAN members and the ASEAN-related forums. We will make it easier for low-risk visitors to come to Australia, and we will encourage more tourists from China and other Asian markets. We will expand our work and holiday program agreements with countries in Asia over time, starting with an increase to 1,000 places in our work and holiday visa program with Indonesia. These are important immediate steps for government. They are the beginning for our long-term national plan. Friends, my aim is not only to have a plan to succeed in this century, my aim is that we succeed on our own terms. Right from the beginning, our nation has been different, and we have tried to build a new kind of society and economy here, free of privilege given at birth, free of the snobbishness and obsequiousness that infects older nations, and free also of the deep economic injustices that so many of us or our forebears left behind in another country. 100 years ago, we spoke of the working man's paradise. Today, we speak of the high-skill, high-wage road. We have always wanted to do it our way. We long saw Asia as a threat to all this, racially, militarily, and economically. Indeed, this was precisely the moral paradox of the working man's paradise. 100 years ago, high wages meant white man's wages. No more. 30 years ago, Australia was still a closed and isolated economy. Pockets of engagement were the exception, and the old model of economic and social protection was breaking. 30 years ago, Asia was still largely a continent of poverty, where the ascendant islands of opportunity in the northeast didn't outweigh the reality of the whole. Back in the 80s, we had to liberalise a closed economy to compete with the old Asia. Today, we have to educate an open society to compete in the new Asia. Today, we no longer have to juggle our social democratic values and our Asian regional context. They come together as two great national strengths. There has never been a better time or a better age to be a Labor Prime Minister. Today, our strength doesn't defend our social model, it relies on our social model. Today, Labor still believes in opportunity for all as the best vision of the future. Today, opportunity for all through education and work is also the best national plan for prosperity. Because we can only win in this century if every child gets winning results at school. We can only win in this century if every person can win a great job. We can only win in this century if every sector of our economy is dynamic, productive, engaged. This is the plan Australia needs in the Asian century, a plan for national success, a roadmap for the whole of Australia, governments, business, unions and the broader community. We know Australia has changed and Asia has changed, and we know this demands new changes of us today. We know what national success means to Australians. Australia only wins if every Australian wins. Australia is only strong if every Australian is strong. We know we need a plan to build on our strengths. This white paper is the plan, and with this plan, we know the answer to the question asked of Australia today. Can we be a winner in the Asian century? Absolutely, we can get it done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, PM,
Thank you.
for that speech and for sketching a very compelling vision of a strong, open Australia engaging in a national effort with a rising and increasingly wealthy Asia. The PM has agreed to take questions for about 15 minutes from our invited guests, and I will conduct those questions, and there'll be a press conference a little bit later in the day for the working press. PM, can I kick off the Q&A with a question about your personal experiences? You've travelled extensively as Prime Minister in China and India and Indonesia and Japan and South Korea. What are the signals that you've picked up personally that the Asian century is upon us? What impresses you in China and Indonesia and India about the rising Asia?
Well, if I can share some impressions that I've had the privilege to gather myself and also to witness in the eyes of others as I've travelled. Perhaps one of the most startling, I went to Korea with some of our veterans who had fought there in the Korean War. Some of them had made Korea a passion and they'd been back there many times, but for many of them it was the first time they had returned to Korea since they walked out of the battlefield 60 years ago. And to be with them as they went around the city of Seoul, that told you the story of Asia's rise and where we're going to get to next. They had literally walked out of blood-soaked battlefields and they come back to what is one of the truly great cities of the world in my view. So a very sharp impression. In China, the impression I always have as I go around is that the noise you can hear around you is the noise of new buildings rising out of the ground. It seems to happen that quickly. In India, the impression I always have is one of youth. I think the median age in India, the mean age is 25 or 26, and it's an incredibly young country, and you feel that sense of youth and energy as you move around. In Indonesia, I am always, heartened by what I think of as a modern miracle. I went as a young parliamentarian to be an election monitor in the first free and fair elections in Indonesia. I was moderately resentful in the sense that other people got to go to Lombok. I went to West Timor, so it wasn't exactly the same experience as others had. But I remember that first election and the villagers gathering and voting. And now we've got this vibrant liberal democracy. I, at the UN, amongst other things during Leaders' Week, appeared on a platform with the President of Indonesia and with Prime Minister Gusmao. I mean, if anybody had told you that was going to be possible several years ago, an Australian Prime Minister, a Timor-Leste Prime Minister, a President of Indonesia, exchanging not just pleasantries but warm words about each other, sitting at a platform at the UN, people would have said that's not possible. This is the change that's all around us, and this is the change we are surveying for this national plan for the nation's future.
So I'll take some questions from our invited guests. Can I ask you to mention your name and your affiliation before you ask your question, and if you could wait for the microphone to arrive.
I quite like the delineation working press, as if there's a category of non-working press. Surely that's not right.
I'm going to start with right at the back with one of my colleagues, actually, Linda Jacobsen, who's the East Asia Program Director here at the Institute.
Thank you, Prime Minister. In the White Paper, your government's intention to deepen mutual political trust and confidence is very clearly stated. I'd like to ask, what will be the government's first concrete measures towards building deeper trust with one of Australia's key partners, China?
I'm happy that you've asked that question, because it gives me an opportunity to address what I think is some of the simplistic critique and some of the very, childish style analysis that we see in the media. We are deeply engaged with China at every level. We are engaged politically. There are strong business-to-business links. We are engaged with military-to-military links. We are engaged through education links, including with our great universities partnering in China. Indeed, if you get a grid, and I've seen this done, if you get a map of our research relationships and how they've changed over the last 30 or 40 years, when you first look at the map, all of the dots are going from here to Europe or from here to the US, and then over the time sequence, they start driving into Asia and particularly into China. So we are engaged in every way. Of course, we've got to keep building on that engagement, and that is a focus of the White Paper, and we've got to keep investing in the regional architecture, which is helping build habits of cooperation and trust as the norm, and the East Asia Summit is pivotal in that regard. Other institutions will continue to serve us well, like APEC, but we believe the East Asia Summit is the right body with the right membership, with the expanded mandate to help reinforce these habits of trust and cooperation. So you will see in the White Paper our intention over time to expand our diplomatic footprint, and our intention to continue to engage strongly bilaterally and in these multilateral regional forums.
Thank you, PM. Kevin Hopgood-Brown in the centre.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm Kevin Hopgood-Brown from the Australia-China Council. The paper presents some very inspirational and inspiring goals, I think, for Australia, but they mostly demand that we reorient many of our practices, our perceptions here in Australia. What do you see as some of our biggest domestic challenges in attaining some of these goals?
Well, the White Paper is meant to address at every level for Australian society our need to more deeply engage. But if I could make some comments in answer to your question, I believe it's important that we as a government get what we do right, to build on the down payments we've already put in place for us to thrive and prosper in this Asian century of change and growth, the big reforms that we've driven from seizing a clean energy future through to rolling out the national broadband network, through to the human capital agenda that we are building at every level, from early childhood education all the way through to the highest level of research. But one of the reasons we wanted to put a White Paper out was not just to add more government policy and perceptions to that, but to challenge business, civil society, unions, the media, to think about this at every level too. I touched on this briefly in the speech, but one thing I'd definitely like to see is if I turn on to the news on one of our big commercial broadcasters, I'd like to see the economic correspondent who brings us the news talking as routinely about the economic circumstances in Indonesia or Japan or Vietnam or Korea or what's happening in the Philippines, talking about that as routinely as we get the news out of Washington, out of London, out of Paris, out of, Germany, out of Berlin. You'll turn on your TV and yes, there's been a lot of coverage of the Eurozone crisis, and we can understand that if that had caused a contagion into the world economy, then of course that would have been of significance to all of us. But I think it is time we ask the question, is the best economic outlook we can get on the world endlessly seeing Chancellor Merkel run in and out of rooms in Europe looking harried and stressed, or is it getting deeper, real-time information about the region we live in?
It is striking, PM, that there's two massive leadership transformations going on in the next month or two in the United States and China. We know every detail about the United States down to the marathon time that the Republican candidate for Vice President did or did not run. We know much less about the people who will make the decisions in Beijing. PM, can I ask you a question about our diplomatic network? As you know, we have one of the smaller diplomatic networks in the OECD. I know in the paper there is reference to opening new posts in Thailand and Eastern Indonesia and Mongolia and so on when circumstances allow. How much of a national priority is it for us to bulk up our diplomatic network, especially in Asia?
It is a priority, but in what are fiscally tight times, we need to work through these priorities around the Expenditure Review Committee table, where there's lots of difficult conversations had, and that's why we've expressed it as an aspiration over time. But I do believe that over time our nation needs to be served by a broader diplomatic footprint. When you say that, it probably conjures in people's minds, as it should, ambassadors, doing important government-to-government work. But we've got to remember that our diplomatic footprint also helps with people-to-people links, cultural links, and importantly, through the work that Dr Emerson oversees, business-to-business links through Austrade and associated agencies, and that's very, very important to this century of growth for us.
Thank you, PM. I'll take one more question if there's another question from the audience. The gentleman at the back, please. Yes.
Prime Minister James Teagan, I'm a Lowy Institute supporter. What is your opinion of technology and how it would play a way for Australia to own part of this development you're talking about? It's important, I believe, we retain our intellectual property in Australia. What's your view? What's the government's view on that?
Certainly, we have to be connected to the region and connected and moving information around as quickly as everybody else can move it around. That's why we've been so determined to build the national broadband network, because to leave us with the copper wire technology served us well, but it's not going to serve the needs of this century, which is why fibre to the premises is our vision for the nation's future and part of integrating into our region. We've got to remember that for much of the region we are in, the same or very similar time zones, and that means, business to business links. If you can move information more quickly, then you can do everything in real time very quickly. So that's important to us. But yes, there are security considerations and there's intellectual property protection, where people rightly fear that in some other nations, not our nation, but in other nations, that their intellectual property could be taken and misused. This is part of what we've got to address as we work through a genuine regional economic integration agenda. It's not just about the old days of talking about trade barriers, though there's still some work to do on that, but it's also talking about market rules and regulations, including appropriate protections, so that people can trade and engage with confidence.
All right, thank you, PM.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, We all know that you give powerful speeches. Some of them get millions of hits on YouTube. We'd love to think that your speech to the Lowy Institute today will get 2 million hits on YouTube. I don't know if there are that many Asia policy wonks in the world. We'll see. But can I say that I think your speech was very interesting, it was very substantive, it was very broad and comprehensive, and you've given us at the Institute a great deal to think about and write about. So congratulations, PM, on the white paper. Thank you again for coming to the Lowy Institute to launch it. May I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to thank the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard.